Welcome to the Aid Market Podcast, where foreign aid partners connect to learn about key funding trends and market insight. The podcast is co-hosted by Aid Connect Data, the pipeline and market intel software for USAID partnering, and Connected International, the leading USAID partnering support consulting firm. Now, here's your host, Mike Shanley.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Aid Market Podcast. I'm excited today to have Michael Nyenhuis, the president and CEO of UNICEF USA, with us. He brings 25 years of global humanitarian and development experience. Michael is a former journalist with a passion for global health and previously served on USAID's Advisory Committee on Voluntary Foreign Aid, chaired the board of the Integral Alliance and a global network of faith-based NGOs, and currently serves on the board of Interaction and the Leadership Council at Concordia. Michael, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Love the topics and the conversation we're going to have.
Wonderful. Let's get right into it. UNICEF. Obviously, it's a global brand. Everyone knows the name, but not everyone might be as knowledgeable about the specific work you do. Can you talk a bit about UNICEF's important work globally and where UNICEF USA fits into that picture?
Sure, happy to. UNICEF, of course, is the United Nations Children's Fund, so an agency of the UN. The largest global organization serving children around the world in both humanitarian and development settings, working in 180 countries and responding to every critical issue and disaster you could think about. We like to talk about UNICEF's mission this way. Our goal is to see that every child is healthy, educated, protected, and respected. And those sort of buckets kind of a lot of our work falls into those buckets. A lot of work in the space of health and in education and child protection. And by respect, what we really mean is we put a real premium on making sure that children and youth are at the table, that we're hearing their voices, that they are part of the conversation, that they are actors in building their own future, not just passive recipients of our work. So all four of those things are critically important. UNICEF is a very large, in some way decentralized organizations. Yes, with a center holding it together in New York and Geneva, sort of the base of operations for a UN agency. But each country office operates kind of like a national NGO, working in that country, really well connected to the government, to civil society, to communities in those countries. My organization, UNICEF USA, is part of that kind of global constellation of UNICEF organizations, but somewhat separate from it too. So, UNICEF was founded almost 80 years ago now, and shortly after, UNICEF USA was founded, and then other organizations like it in wealthy countries in Europe and North America and Asia that sit alongside UNICEF. UNICEF USA is an independent, not-for-profit here in the U.S. I report to my governing board, not to UNICEF directly. But we cooperate and work with UNICEF as a supporting agency, sort of doing three things here in the United States that UNICEF can't do. One of them is lobby the U.S. government, both for resources for UNICEF, but also on legislation that we think is critical to children, both globally and domestically. Secondly is private sector fundraising. We do a lot of that, raise a lot of money here in the U.S. that supports UNICEF program work all over the world. And then third, reflecting UNICEF's mission back in some of the work we do with youth here in the United States as well. So yeah, we're part of the global constellation that makes up UNICEF and sit sort of alongside the UN agency rather than actually being a part of it.
Thank you. And so we'll get into a bit more the partnerships, especially the private sector partnerships, as well as the importance of aid. But I'd like to hear a little bit more about UNICEF's work globally, especially the vaccination campaigns and the work you all have done in polio. Mike, could you share a little bit about really the important successes that your organization has achieved in that area?
Yeah, and this is such a great story of how governments, private sector partners, and agencies like UN and or UNICEF operate together to really accomplish something big. So we're on the verge, and I almost hate to say this because getting to the very end is always difficult. But we're on the verge of the elimination of polio from the planet. Not that far away from it. Back in the 80s, there were 350,000 children every year who were hit by polio and disabled by it in some way or another, or died from it. Even uh, last year, there were 12 cases left from wild polio in the border areas of Afghanistan, Pakistan. So we're still working on that, and this has been accomplished through this really great collaborative partnership. So it was really begun by Rotary, the service organization, and Rotarians all around the world raising money to do something outrageous, which is to rid the planet of a disease. It's only been one disease that's been eradicated, and that's smallpox, and polio will likely be the second. Because first and foremost, these Rotarians decide to do something outrageous and try to tackle this. They've been joined by the Gates Foundation and some others in terms of being the primary funders for this work, partnering with governments all around the world in their vaccination campaigns, and UNICEF plays the critical role of actually making sure the vaccines get delivered and get into the hands of the vaccinators who actually do the vaccination of children. UNICEF is the largest single supplier of vaccines in the world. We vaccinate 45% of the world's under 5 children every year with all the basic vaccines that they need, and polio is one of them. And in the work that we have done to work toward eradication of polio, the work is not just about the vaccines; it's about building health systems, building local health systems, training vaccinators, making sure that the cold chains are in place to deliver vaccines all the way down to the community. So this has been an incredible effort since the 1980s. Every year, we think we're just right at the end. Getting the last few cases gone is difficult and complicated, especially in a place like the border areas of Pakistan and Afghanistan. But we're working hard at it with the partners, and expect that we'll get it done.
Well, on that note, let's go into the partners. And obviously, I imagine there's no shortage of partners interested in working with your team. How does, when you have a brand like UNICEF, how do you go about finding the right partners that are going to align with your goals, align with the mission, align with the project objectives? What does partnering look like from your team's perspective?
Yeah, I might probably start with our partnerships with governments. So this is really where it starts for UNICEF. In all of our program countries, we have what's called a country program document, which is basically a plan of action that's agreed on with the host government about what needs to be accomplished for children in their countries, and the role that UNICEF will play and other partners will play and the government will play in getting that done. One of the things that I think is unique about UNICEF, in that it's a UN agency, so it has really unparalleled access to government ministries who see us as part of their resource, frankly, part of their team to get things done for children in the area of health and education and protection in their countries. So these program documents are developed with countries and actually signed off on by country representatives and signed off on by the UNICEF country representative, and approved at the UNICEF executive board level. It's a very formal thing. But what it does is it gives us the ability to influence how governments are dealing with children in the areas of, again, health, education, protection. We do a lot of projects where we're delivering services, oftentimes through local partners, and I'll get to that in a second. And the purpose of those projects are really twofold. They're one, to actually deliver services to a group of children that need them, but it's also to demonstrate better ways of delivering health or education or protection services to children, and then influencing the government to do more at a bigger scale. as big as UNICEF is, we can't cover a whole country. If you want to get to scale and you want sustainable change, you really have to get the government, which runs most of the education, most of the health, most of the social protection work for children. You have to get them to change the way they do it. And we do that through demonstrating best practices, effective results, and then advocating with the government to do more and to do better. And that's how we get to scale. So the partnerships really start there with the government. In the implementation of the programs, so much of that is actually done through local partners of ours. So it might be a local NGO, that might be a local government health center or whatnot. But in particular, the local NGOs that we work with has also kind of this dual purpose, which is to actually make sure the services are delivered for children. But we're also building the capacity of these local organizations to be stronger, to be more effective, to deliver services in the long run even better. So kind of that dual mission, even at that level. And then as I think about our private sector partners who are partnering with us to provide the resources and some of the motivation or catalytic efforts to see some of this work happen, it's sort of a double issue for them too, right? They want to make sure that they're investing in effective programming. And so they turn to UNICEF because they know that we can deliver that, and that helps them make their case that they are, especially if it's a corporation or foundation, that they're delivering on their social mission that they have. So we see partnership as the center of it all, and I think UNICEF has this unique role in the middle of all of that. The government, other civil society players, local NGOs, funding partners, to make really important things happen for children.
And that really does distinguish you all from other large NGOs with those other points of access, especially with the government connections and maybe even with some of those private sector groups. So I want to get into later to localization and private sector partners. But Michael, let's take a step back and look at the current state of the world right now. And as you look at the state of aid and development globally, what are some of the more pressing needs that come to mind that you see?
Yeah, we talk a lot about the polycrisis now, sort of a new word we're all using to talk about the one crisis after another that children are facing around the world. And it started with COVID. There's more conflict today than there has been. We have more children displaced from their homes today than at any other time in human history. This is a huge crisis. We have poverty issues. It's just one crisis after another. So we're concerned about all of them, and deeply engaged. Whether it's a conflict issue in Sudan or Ukraine or in Israel, Gaza, we're there working on behalf of children. Whether it's climate change issues, which I've seen directly myself, and hard hit drought areas in Africa, where we're working to build climate resilient water systems and climate resilient schools and things like that to deal with the issues of climate change. But there's another crisis that we're talking more about here too, and I like to call it the equity crisis, which is it takes resources to do work wherever you are, and there are too many resources, not too many resources. There are lots of resources going to certain places around the world because of donor interest and media attention. But there are so many other places that are being left out entirely. So we think about the amount of money we raised to be able to respond in Ukraine or in Gaza. Those are tremendous, and we've used those resources and need even more. But lots of attention in those places. But then there are 1 million displaced children in the north of Burkina Faso, a small West African country that most people, at least in our context here in the United States, have never heard of. And who's worried about those 1 million children who are also suffering a lot? Well, UNICEF is worried about it because we have a country office in Burkina Faso and have worked there for a long time, but don't have the level of resources to reach children in places like that. So, along with these other crises that we talk a lot about, again, conflict issues and climate and those sorts of things, talking more and more about this equity crisis, the need to to think about and have the resources to respond to the needs of children wherever they are, and not leave some of them left out.
So, with that changing landscape, do you see the role of aid and development, both partners and donors, changing, or needing more partners, or how? Yeah, what do you see the role of NGOs changing, and the way donors should look at their role changing?
Yeah, I um I what I want to see is the role of donors changing to a degree, right? So what I mean by that is we need donors who are increasingly willing to trust organizations like UNICEF to use resources where they're needed, and not be so prescriptive and directive about where those resources are to go. In order to reach the places like Burkina Faso that I just mentioned, but many, 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 many others that aren't getting any attention, we need more flexible resources to do that. So we're encouraged by some of the movement that we see here in the U.S. in the philanthropic world, led by people like Mackenzie Scott, who is identifying organizations she trusts and putting money in their hands and say, go do your work. We trust you to do it. And hope to see more of that kind of movement. Over time, we've been really good, even in the nonprofit sector in the U.S., making sure that donors, whether they're institutional donors who are giving lots of resources, governments, the U.S. government, foundations, corporations, or even individual donors, down to those who are giving $10 or $25, that they can specifically designate where that money goes. Maybe I'm a small donor with $25 I want to give to a specific well in a particular community because I want to know where it went. And totally get that completely. But that tends to help create this equity crisis that I'm talking about. That the places that are attractive to donors, the places that get media attention, tend to get the resources. And there are children and families in other places that are not receiving that same level of support. And we need to trust organizations like UNICEF that has the bigger picture, because we're in all these places and we have to balance the ability to respond in Ukraine, yes, but also in other countries that no one's heard of, or a crisis that nobody knows about, as well. So I'm hoping that we may get to a time here where more donors are seeing this idea of what we're calling trust-based philanthropy. Find an organization you trust, put resources in their hands, and let them carry out the work that they know needs to be done. So I think we have to, those of us in the NGO sector, in the nonprofit sector, we have to get better at telling the story about why this is important and how we use those resources that are given to us more flexibly. And so, yeah, I think that's going to take a little bit of work on our effort to make sure we can make the case for it.
Yeah, and it really seems like that kind of giving is relationship based, of the donor to the organization, and them really trusting the organization, and maybe over years building up that relationship. We recently had on Jamie Rogers. He's the chief acquisition officer at USAID. He talked about, from their perspective, trying to be more flexible, looking at where does risk play into to government donation, or government funding. Do you see the solution to that? More private sector, more foundation giving, or is there opportunities for generally risk averse bilaterals and multilaterals to become more flexible in their funding? Looking at someone like USA, that is nearly $40 billion is what they distributed last year. What do you see as, and especially with your work with the government, the role or the opportunities for evolution or development within their funding mechanisms?
Yeah, we need all of them. They're the ones with the biggest purses, right? So, and they also tend to set the tone. So if they experiment and try new approaches that provide more flexibility, then I think others will follow that as well. So we do need them to think about that and recognize the importance of the ability of organizations to on the ground to know where the needs are and how to respond to them, being less prescriptive and a little more trusting in that. So yeah, I hope we see that all across the donor spectrum. Again, when you talk about the private sector, the private side, especially individuals, I think in some sense those of us in the nonprofit sector have done a disservice to ourselves and to the people we serve by offering so many opportunities for people to designate even small amounts of money to specific things, as opposed to trying to help them understand the bigger picture and how valuable it is to be a part of something even bigger than that.
And I think that's an important reminder to individual donors too, that even though their dollar amount might be smaller than a USAID or World Bank giving, if it is flexible for the organization, that can be much more valuable than maybe a large, or maybe not more valuable, but can play a very targeted role. So, well, moving on then, as a lot of our audience are the aid organizations themselves. So they're looking down the road, how should they be evolving and preparing for what the aid and development landscape and market will look like in 5 years? What do you see, again, as what that would look like, which both is what you talked about, the continuing crises globally, but also changing technologies, changing political landscapes. What do you see as what do you see the ecosystem looking like in 5 years?
Well, it's interesting. I had a conversation yesterday with a gentleman who runs a smaller U.S.-based NGO that works in the health space, and they're sort of built on a model of sending teams of physicians out of the country to do important work, and they've come to the realization that kind of direct services that they're providing is super valuable. But if they want to make a transformative change, they really have to start investing in local capacity. So they're beginning to do more training. They're helping improve the health system that their teams will operate in for a brief period and will be left behind. So they're really taking a much broader look as to how do you make longer term sustainable change rather than just delivering projects. And this is really linked to this idea I said that I think UNICEF is really, really good at, which is to use project-based work to demonstrate best practices and new ways of operating, and then using that and the data from that, the evaluation data that says this actually works, to change policy, to change systems. And I think that's where a lot of us are moving anyway. But I think more and more in the aid community, we need to be thinking about who ultimately is responsible for delivering these services to children and families in these countries. And oftentimes it's going to be the government, maybe some private sector as well. But how are we investing in them, and how are we encouraging them to new approaches? How are we trying to influence them? The importance of policy change and advocacy in these countries becomes maybe even more important over time than the projects that we deliver, because that's how we're going to get, again, change at scale and ensuring that it's sustainable. So I think some of these things, the recognition of policy, how important policies are, advocacy for policy change, system strengthening, and moving, I don't want to say past direct services, not past them because they're still critically important in so many places, but in addition to, like the gentleman I was talking to yesterday, who they're not going to stop this work that they do doing direct medical services. They see value in that, but they're adding to that portfolio more systems change work, which it becomes really important.
Well, we've talked a lot about local partners so far. Localization is a priority of Administrator Samantha Power, the USAID administrators, one of her leading initiatives. How does your team see localization, and what does that mean to you all?
Yeah, and I think this is number one. I think this is the right conversation, and we have it, every day in the NGO sector. You mentioned in introducing me that I'm on the board of Interaction, which is our U.S. Association of U.S.-based humanitarian and development organizations working globally. There's 180 of us or so, all the big names you've heard of, NGOs and many others. Uh, um, and we don't have a meeting anymore where we're not talking about localization as critical. And what does that mean to international NGOs? What does USAID's commitment to 25% of its resources going to a local organization? What does that mean to these agencies that receive international agencies that receive money from USAID? What's our responsibility there in doing that? I would say this is one of those places where I think UNICEF is way ahead, and I'm really proud of that. I already have talked about our partnership with local civil society organizations, local NGOs, national service organizations that are often our implementing partners. And our work with them is, again, to do two things. One, to actually make sure the services are delivered well, but also to build the capacity of these local organizations. I was reading a statistic in a UNICEF report recently that talked about something like something higher than 40% of our humanitarian funding is directed toward local organizations as the implementers. This exceeds the grand bargain target of 25%, which is what USAID is focused on. And so, some recognition, I think, of the fact that UNICEF takes this very seriously and has been doing this for a long time. Recognize that capacity building at the local level is part of that long-term sustainability that's needed.
One of the many kind of challenges that has come up over the various iterations of localization from USAID is if you're going to measure it, you have to define what local is. And do you get more focused on what is the perspective? Could this be an international NGO, but all the staff is local? So it's 100% Kenyan staff in the Nairobi office. There's a local perspective. Or is the focus on what is the board structure? Do they have a board in the UK or in the US? What is the tax status? What do you think when we're talking about localization of local partners? What's important in defining what is a local partner?
Yeah, because there's different flavors as you're describing. I think for me, first and foremost, we should be thinking about nationally registered, governed organizations. I think that's where we really want to see that investment happen. In some sense, I do make the argument a lot that a UNICEF country office in a country operates like a national NGO. Yes, they are connected to this much larger structure. Most of the staff are national to that country. They're so well connected to the community, to local civil society, to the governments. So they operate, I think, a lot like a national NGO. They take UNICEF's mission and adapt it for the context of that country, and again, build out the program plan with the government through this country program document I was talking about before. All that said, an office of UNICEF is a international organization operating in that country. And I think, again, we have the role and responsibility of identifying the truly local organizations that are governed there, that are registered there as a national NGO or as a local community-based organization, and make those investments because again, it's their country. They're the ones who ultimately has to take responsibility for what happens there. So I hope that that's our first priority. But that said, I think there's a whole variety of ways you could look at that. An international NGO that really has taken localization of their own organizations seriously, so that country office really operates like a national NGO in the country, is another flavor of this that's important too.
And then what's your advice for one of those local organizations? We work with them regularly who is not connected to USAID or to the UN or to the World Bank or these established donors. Maybe they have some small direct funding and they're interested in working on these larger projects, accessing that funding. They bring that local perspective. They don't have the connections or maybe the understanding of how the procurement process works for USAID, say. What's your advice for organizations like that on how they can best allocate their limited resources to effectively access that funding if it's the right fit, but without distracting from their core mission?
Yeah, I think this is where the idea of partnership or even mentorship from an international NGO that has that experience and is committed to this idea of localization and is looking for those local partners where they can be a big help in that. It's a complicated thing to work with USAID or any of the other donor agencies within countries in Europe, for instance. But there are a lot of people in the international NGO sector who do this day in and day out, and they know how to do it, and they know how to navigate all of that. And again, if the international NGOs don't see the local NGOs as competitors now for this resource, but truly as partners to help invest in and help grow and build capacity, then I think they can work together really well in order to attract the kinds of resources that can make a difference in their countries.
So let's shift a little bit to overall funding picture in the U.S. Obviously, there's a current of politicians that are questioning the importance of aid and foreign aid and what role that plays for U.S. foreign policy, for economic development globally, for global stability. What's your response to anyone that asks or questions, why do we need foreign aid? Why do we need NGOs? There's problems everywhere. Why would we spend this money globally? What's the importance of protecting and funding foreign aid programs globally?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to make the moral argument first, but that's sometimes pragmatically is not maybe the place to start. But that is, we have a responsibility as a wealthy country with resources to help those in other parts of the world who don't share in the riches that we have and don't share in the privileges and opportunities that we've had. And I say that about our individual and collective investments in our own communities, where that imbalance exists. Here in our own country as well, but that's true globally. You can't isolate yourself, as in I only care about the country I'm in anymore. This is a global world, and we are global citizens and global neighbors, and there is that moral argument that I think our country has led on, for generations now, and should be, we should continue that. But there's the pragmatic part of it as well. If you want to just talk about global security, it's the areas that are going to cause us problem are where there are failed states and where there are one generation after another without opportunity that are going to seek to, I don't know, leave their countries in Central America and South America and head to the U.S. border, for instance, or where there is conflict that might spill over, or flip it the other way, economic opportunity. Some of the best economic opportunities now are in some of the fast-growing economies in places like Africa. Well, why are some of those countries in the position there? Because good investments have been made in humanitarian development work over time to help those countries be in a position now to accelerate. And that creates economic opportunity for not only people in that country, but elsewhere, including here. So I think there are just so many arguments to be made about why we want to be involved. Again, start with the moral argument, go to the security argument, and end with the economic opportunity argument. Seems pretty simple to me, But again, I know there's a lot of pushback right now in some quadrants of Washington, and we deal with that all the time at UNICEF USA. Our public policy team working on Capitol Hill, both sides of the aisle, making the arguments every day. We've been very fortunate over decades, really, to have strong support for UNICEF specifically, but broadly for foreign aid among Republicans and Democrats, and so we count on those who've supported all of this in the past to make the arguments to their colleagues, that this is really important.
And there's in the military too, actually the U.S. military, we recently had on the former chief of staff of the U.S. Army, General Casey, on talking about his perspective on the importance of aid. General Mattis, who's the former Secretary of Defense, talking about if we cut aid, we need, in his words, more ammunition. And the military talking about how they are the most expensive, the last resort.
Yeah.
Fund aid so that it's the military asking the aid organizations, don't make us be necessary. But fund the important work they do. So, well, thank you for that. Let's move into the private sector partnerships then. Naming some of the large brand names: BMW, Louis Vuitton, Microsoft, Formula One, Spotify. How do these partnerships come about? I imagine it's much more, there's not an RFP that BMW, I imagine, puts out saying we're looking for partners. I'd imagine it's much more relationship based, looking for those aligned values. Could you talk a bit about how these develop and what the process of building and implementing a partnership like that looks like?
Yeah, right. And these are big and complex partnerships when you're talking about big global companies, for instance, and a big global brand like UNICEF. I do think there's a nice fit there with a big global corporate brand and a big global brand like UNICEF. Both are interested in driving results at scale. And I think that's true of these companies that have stretched out around the globe in their own commercial activities. They're looking for impact, the kind of impact they deliver through their products or services at scale. And we're interested in that too. So I think there's some general alignment there. UNICEF also has the advantage of, again, being present everywhere and operating in a lot of the places where these companies operate too, or in markets that they're interested in, or whatever it might be. This sort of a geographic overlay that's connected to. But big companies like that have they recognize both the again, maybe this moral argument that they have a contribution to make around the world, but there's also a lot of regulatory reasons why, and that they need to show their commitment, and so they're looking for partners that can help them deliver at scale. And I think that gives us an advantage. Sometimes companies come to us, which is those great moments when someone knocks on your door. A lot of times it's our teams going to the companies, building those relationships, and often starts with just a general idea of something they want to accomplish that fits into our general mission. And then it is usually long conversations about how to structure that, and involving a lot of different players. And we get the UNICEF country office and technical program staff involved in helping companies think through the right approaches to accomplishing something that's important to them, that is also aligned to our goals and our missions. Our mission here at UNICEF. So I think some of the most exciting things we do are with companies. You mentioned Microsoft. We have this incredible program called the Learning Passport that's using their technology to create digital learning environments for children. Original idea was for children who are outside their countries as refugees, to give them access to their national curriculum while they're outside their country as refugees, in order to continue to make progress in school. And the Microsoft digital tools and platforms that make that available, our access to these kids, create just the kind of partnership that can only happen when you bring organizations like that together.
And then in reaching out to them, say some new company that you're interested in working with, is it best to try to find that internal champion at any level, maybe someone that worked at UNICEF or the UN or USAID? Or do you typically just go for the executive office, the CEO, and try to get the highest level person's attention, and share how you're aligning with what their corporate mission is?
Yeah, it's always great to get the CEO first because if they want something done, it usually gets done. I think what's important to remember about institutions, and I mean that companies or foundations, we do a lot of partnership too with civil society organizations, faith-based organizations, again, whether it's Rotary or a church denomination. That these institutions are all a collection of people. And so those people in those organizations are the ones making decisions, and they're this whole idea of finding the champion in there who's in the right place, who really wants to see something done in their organization along this, and building relationship with those people and making sure that they understand what can be done and what can be accomplished in the kind of partnership, and then help them to be the champions within their organizations. And yeah, sometimes it's a C-suite person, sometimes it's the head of CSR, sometimes it's somebody else within the organization who's really making the pathway through that company more doable for us. So they're people, and people they both want to be touched, I think, but with both their head in terms of what can be done and how things are structured and all that, but also their heart. We're dealing with children here, and children who are in vulnerable circumstances, and so when we can touch both the head and the heart, whether it's a person in a company or whether it's an individual philanthropist, that's when I think you can really get things done.
We've talked a lot about the global brand. I mean, even Lionel Messi, when he played for Barcelona, had the UNICEF logo on his jersey. That's wonderful. What's your advice for organizations that don't have that brand exposure? Maybe the local partners or even just smaller partners that will approach a company and the company will maybe never heard of them. Do you have any advice for organizations in that situation on how they can effectively find the partnerships, making sure that the partnership also be structured that it benefits them as an organization and helps push forward their mission?
Yeah, I do think the big brand does help in a lot of cases. I think big brands sort of attract one another, but I think for any organization, it's about your unique value proposition. It's the thing that you can deliver that nobody else can or nobody else can do as well as you can do, and so it's making the case based on that value proposition, and then it's about alignment. Again, whether it's a company or a foundation or an individual for that matter, not every company is the right partner for a specific NGO because they may have something totally different in mind in terms of their priorities. So a lot of research, like our sort of new business development teams, looking at companies and foundations and whatnot, are always looking for that alignment. Is there something about what this company has said or that they have done in the past that says, "Hey, they're interested. We think they are interested in the kinds of work that we do," and so I think, that's a critical place, especially for a smaller organization that maybe has a particular niche. Is finding which institutions, and again, I would say individuals as well, have a passion for that particular niche, have shown that they have invested in it in the past, or have articulated some way that that's important to them in their social mission in the world. So that takes a good bit of work too, but it's worth doing because when you find the right partnership. I think I tell our team here, we only get to do work at the intersection of three things. Think about a Venn diagram. One circle is there's a need in a community, right? In our case, for children in a particular place. We have second circle is we have the ability to meet that need, and by ability I mean everything from it's within our vision and mission, it's within our strategic plan. It's something we have technical capacity to do, and then the third circle that goes in there is donor interest. Donors have to be interested in that particular thing to get that work done. So finding those that have that interest is really important, because then you bring those three circles together, and things can get done. I'll go back to what we were talking about at the very start of this conversation about the need for more trust-based philanthropy and flexible funding. The hope is that more of those donors, as they sort of look at the organization, are again not so prescriptive to narrow down where those three circles come together and make space so small because they're only interested in that. But actually, they broaden it up a little bit so that it's the intersection of the need of a community and an organization's ability to meet that need where most of the decision making has happened.
Or maybe even engage the NGOs in drawing their circles and
Yeah.
getting your input on where those should be drawn.
Yeah.
So I'd like to move into your thoughts on leadership. For the next question, as CEO, what do you see as your role as CEO of UNICEF USA?
Yeah. Um, so a lot of things to go there. I like to tell this story though on this that you mentioned in the opening as well that I started my career as a journalist, and my father used to say to me, he said, "You journalists are dangerous people. You know a little bit about a lot of things, but you don't know much about anything." And there's some truth to that, because most journalists are a little more general and they cover lots of different topics and subjects, and they're not the expert in any of them, but they know how to find the experts, and they know what questions to ask, and they know when the answers maybe don't sound exactly right, so they can push a little bit harder. And I actually think that training has played very well in my work as a CEO. Right, so I'm really blessed to have a really strong leadership team. I'm not the expert in finance. I know enough about it. I actually have an MBA, but I'm not the finance expert. But I have a CFO who's really good. I know what questions to ask him. I know when the answers don't sound exactly right and how to push a little bit further. I'm not the marketing expert, though I've been involved in that for a long time. I have a chief marketing officer who is, and I know what kind of questions to ask of her. And so I think that role of being to know enough about all the critical areas of your organization, but not not needing to be the expert in any of them. To have people you trust in those roles, and to know how to ask the right questions to make sure you're all in a line, I think is really important. So generally that, and then I think the other critical part of is so building that team that you have of those experts, and then it's making sure that the vision and strategy of the organization is clear. So maybe some of the communication skills I bring from my journalism days are helpful in that too, in terms of just articulating what we're trying to accomplish and making sure that we're aligned to it.
And in that vision, you have the advantage of the global brand, but also the challenge of being under a global brand or part of a global brand. How do you develop your vision within that context for UNICEF USA in the broader ecosystem?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a very different job than I had twice before. So before this, my last two jobs, I led independent U.S. NGOs, where I had span of control over everything. And now I lead a large piece of a much larger organization that's networked and connected and all that. And to get stuff done in that large, connected, networked UNICEF organization is a lot about diplomacy and negotiation, and sometimes not as much about just decision making, which I would like. So it's actually interesting. It's an interesting model, maybe not unlike a large corporate sort of federated model. And there are a lot of NGOs that are like this too. World Vision, Save the Children, others that have international offices that sort of run the programs, and then lots of offices in other countries that are supporting that, and they work in a federation and in a network similar to how we operate. But again, it takes some different skill sets, some different leadership skill sets to operate within within this environment. I have the privilege of within this UNICEF ecosystem, there are 33 organizations like mine in wealthy countries around the world. So UNICEF Canada, UNICEF UK, Germany, most of the European countries, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, places like that. There's 33 of them that are all independent, not-for-profits in their own country, like us, that have this affiliation with UNICEF, and there's kind of an association of those 33, and I have the privilege of chairing that association currently. There are places and ways that I represent all 33 of them to UNICEF itself, and it's a powerful model when you have that kind of decentralized structure with local knowledge and local influence in really important countries all around the world, and then harnessing all of that to help make UNICEF even more impactful around the world. And yeah, it's a little bit different model, but really interesting to be in it.
Could you get into a bit about how you effectively run things? What your day, what a normal day looks like for you in terms of how do you balance team management, coordination, thinking through the vision personally, communicating that vision, other work. What does what does a typical day look like for you?
Yeah, it's hard. There's not that many typical days. I mean, I just think about today already, right? So, thinking about communication to the staff, spent a little time this morning. We use Slack as a tool to communicate within our organization, and I have a channel in there where I just call it my notebook, where I post things I want people to know, things I've so did a little bit of that this morning to make sure I'm connected to the staff and they're hearing from me on whatever. I spent some time with with some colleagues on the interaction board that I mentioned, this NGO association, and I say that because of the importance of being networked together. We work together on lobbying in Washington, on foreign aid issues and things like that. So that importance of those network connections. I spent some time on this today already on the NGO, or the association of these what UNICEF calls national committees, UNICEF USA, and all these other. Spent some time on those issues today already, and then talking with you and with your audience to share the story of UNICEF, what we're about. So those are different components just in one day. Some internal, how we operate as an organization, some of our relationships with other agencies and whatnot, and promotion of our work as well.
So, what's your advice then for leaders of other NGOs, small local partners, large partners, organizations of all sizes, of what they can be working on now to foster the systems, the organizational structure, the leadership qualities to be prepared for the uncertainty in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in having a network of peers to bounce things off, right? Because things are happening not just in our organization, but broader than that. I mentioned Interaction, our association. We have a network of CEOs there, all the CEO members. We have a WhatsApp channel. And that channel is active all the time with people reaching out to one another, going, "Hey, has anybody faced this? What are you doing on that?" The conversation just over the last few days has been about organizational structure. Which of the CEOs, who has a COO, and how have you structured around that? To try to limit the amount of time you're spending on internal operations, so you can be focused on the external partnerships and all of that, and really rich dialogue from all the different experiences of these different organizations. And I find it to be incredibly helpful to me, and I know this group does as well, because we use this WhatsApp channel a lot to share with one another. We don't operate in vacuums, and we should be seeking out best practices and next practices, and who's operating in a different way that I hadn't thought of before. And I always learn something from those conversations and connection to peers. So one of my advice all the time is do you have that network of peers? They're running a nonprofit here in the United States is just a huge privilege, especially in doing the kind of work that we do around the world. There's certain things that you can say, but there's other things you can't really say to your board of directors. There's certain things you can say, but maybe can't always say to even to your leadership team really close. Where is that place you have to bounce ideas off of, to share, as I like to say, both the joys and sorrows of leading organizations like this, and that those peer networks, I think, are really important.
Great. Thank you for that. Couple quick things I wanted to get your thoughts on too before we wrap up is technology and AI. What has been your assessment so far, and what are things that you're going to be looking for to see how the impact of AI affects the aid and development community?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to have dramatic effects and impact on us, like it is every other sector of our economy and of our culture and all of that. I think it will have, and if we're not paying close attention to it and already experimenting and thinking about it, we're way behind already. I was at a global UNICEF meeting in London just a few weeks ago. We had a AI expert from Oxford who came and gave a presentation. And it was his basic message is, it's not that it's coming, it's already here. And if you're not paying attention to it, you're already way behind. We're not technology companies as NGOs. And so the risk that we sort of fall behind. And I would also say too, I think, just speaking in the US context, this overemphasis over the years among donors in this program ratio. Like, what's your program ratio? What percentage of are you spending on program versus fundraising and administration? This overemphasis on that, I think, has starved not-for-profits from investing in things like technology in a way that they should. And my fear is that AI is going to be the same. We're not going to make the investments in it because it might drop our program ratio, and that's not going to look good at Tyranny Navigator or wherever. So I think we need to be careful at this and recognize this. This is an immediate concern that has long-term consequences to address it. So we're taking obviously a close look at it at UNICEF and at UNICEF USA, and thinking about not only policy development, but how do we just experiment with it more and more. To be able to harness, in UNICEF we think about children, obviously, and we think about both the benefits of it potentially in education, for instance, and also the risks to children too. And this is going to be like any other tool; it's going to have double edge on it, some huge benefits and some huge risks for children as well. And we put a lot of effort and time and thought into what we call child safeguarding. And this has to be part of that conversation in our organization as well.
Well, as we wrap up, I'd like to ask the so what? What's the key from this conversation? Everyone's going to go back to their organizations, to working on proposals, implementing programs, building partnerships. What's the key takeaway that you'd like to leave our audience with?
Well, the world has changed a lot. It's changing faster all the time. And the way we've operated in the past cannot be the way that we operate in the future. And just going back to some of the things we've touched on, I think that's both in this whole idea of direct services versus policy change. We need to be thinking about how we change systems, how do we change policy, not just deliver services, as valuable as and needed as that still is. We have to think about how we change philanthropy to be more trust-based, to be more flexible, so that we can deal with this equity crisis that exists. And just the conversation on AI right now, it's going to change so much of the way we operate that we need to embrace it. So, and the whole issue of localization that we've talked about too. Like, this is a moment of significant change in all of those things, and we have to be as astute about the way we operate and the way we deliver impact as any sophisticated business is, because we need to be sophisticated businesses as well. And what we're delivering is impact. In our case, for children, in other cases for women or families or whatever it is, that NGOs do. Our impact is really important. So we need to be incredibly astute about it and be aware of the changes that are happening around us and making sure we're out ahead of them.
Great, thank you. So, how can our audience get in touch and with your team and follow your work and donate to your cause?
Yeah, UNICEFUSA.org is the best place to make that connection, and you can find connections to all kinds of news about our work, ways to support it, and connections to us as a team.
Wonderful. Michael, thank you for taking some time to share the important work you and your team are doing globally every day. Thank you for doing that work and really appreciate hearing from you today.
Thanks for bringing us on and highlighting the work. Appreciate it.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Aid Market Podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and connect with Mike Shanley on LinkedIn to stay updated on the latest USAID funding trends.